Hello, and welcome to this overview of historical romance books with the word Duchess in the title. I'm Olivia, your favorite resource for book recommendations you can easily screenshot, and you're watching Random Olive Reads. Any Duchess Will Do by Tessa Dare is book 4 of the Spindle Cove series. A duke is basically kidnapped by his own mother and taken to what's known as Spinster Cove to find a wife. He picks out the most unsuitable woman in the place, who is the barmaid. Now, Griffin and Pauline strike up a bargain where he'll pay for her time while she makes sure to be the most unsuitable Duchess candidate that she can. They have competing goals here because he just wants to be left alone and sad and wallow in some personal tragedy that we do find out about later in the book. And she wants enough money to save up to open a bookshop with her sister. Of course, all this time spent together, they do eventually fall in love with the support of his mother, who really just wants to be a grandmother. The Duchess Deal by Tessa Dare is book 1 of the Girl Meets Duke series. Now, if you're looking for an easy to read, super funny historical romance, this is the one for you. We start with a seamstress barging into a duke's home wearing his ex fiance's super ugly wedding dress and demanding payment for it because his ex fiance did not. And then this duke decides to propose to the woman. He needs a wife and an heir, and since his last fiance left him after he was scarred from the war, and this new girl seems to need the money, it sounds like a win win. She accepts the proposal with several conditions, including saying she'll bring her cat. She doesn't even actually have a cat, she just finds one on the street that day. Of course, they'll need to stay together in London till she gets pregnant, and then she's going to be shipped off to a country estate to raise the kid. Both of our main characters have past hurts in their lives, but they work through them and open up to each other. And there's just so much humor in this story. Switching gears to a more emotional story, we have The Duchess Hunt by Lorraine Heath. This is book 2 of the Once Upon a Dukedom series. Now, this one's a detour from the main family of the series so that we can catch up with the jilted Duke from book 1. Now, this man has charged his secretary with his new wife search, but he doesn't know that she's been in love with him forever. Over the course of this book, he realizes that he's attracted to her and starts an affair, but knows that she's not really Duchess material. She also has a pretty big secret in the background and that she may or may not be being blackmailed over. So, this one is big on competence and quiet compatibility. And it's also really fun to see all of the Duke's friends knowing that his secretary is really the most important person in his life. Always Be My Duchess by Amelie Howard is book 1 of the Taming of the Duke series. We have a high stakes meet cute when running away from footpads, and Lysander and Nev have an instant connection. He hires her to pretend to be his escort for an evening, which then turns out to end up being the rest of the season. He's cold and doesn't show emotion well, prioritizing business over relationships. Now, she is just trying to survive and care for her injured sister without sacrificing her integrity. The level of angst and longing and realizations of love in this book are really good. The Day of the Duchess by Sarah MacLean is book 3 of the Scandal and Scoundrel series. We meet this couple at the start of book 1 of the series, where the Duke is on page visibly cheating on his wife at a garden party, setting off the events of that book. Now, this book is told in a non chronological timeline, showing how these two ended up married in the first place and the current status of their relationship. At some point, Sarah has left her husband and left the country, not to be found, and she has returned after 2 years to ask for a divorce. Malcolm, meanwhile, has been spending that time chasing after her and trying to look for her, and is very hesitant to give in to her request. He does finally relent on the condition that she help him find a replacement wife. Now, with all of the chapters that are told in the previous timeline, we see how these two people meet, fall in love, and end up in an entrapped and loveless marriage, even though they fell in love in the first place. So, even though Malcolm seemed to be villainous before we even started this book, we start to see a little bit of how things turned out the way they did and why he was behaving the way that he did. It's definitely a twisty, angsty story here that packs an emotional punch. A Duchess a Day by Terrace Michaels is book one of the Awakened by a Kiss series. Now, despite its title, neither of the two main characters here are a duchess. So it is sort of a Snow White ish retelling. We have the huntsman who was jailed for killing the Snow White type character of the story, but he really didn't. He just helped her escape. And he is hired out of the prison to prevent a duke's fiance from running off. Now, she has her own scheme to try to get out of the engagement by basically throwing the Duke a Duchess candidate a day. There's actually great communication here where the lady actually recruits the huntsman to help her, and it's just really sweet and really cute and very clever use of Snow White callbacks, and you can definitely feel the longing between these two characters. A Duchess by Midnight by Charles Michaels is book three of the Awakened by a Kiss series, and it's another fairy tale retelling, twisty, inspired story. We have Cinderella's stepsister, who is a spinster and kind of a reformed mean girl. She is set up by the princess to help a duke with his nieces, because they have no manners and don't know how to act in polite society. Apparently, the nieces and the Duke's sister lived in some sort of commune, and they've recently arrived at the Duke's doorstep. Now, our main character, Drew, is supposed to be like the picture of propriety. So when she gets caught kissing the Duke, they pretty much need to get married right away to set a good example for the young nieces. And this one is another kind of light-hearted, low angst situation, even though the niece and the sister were under some strange circumstances. Still, really good book. The Portrait of a Duchess by Scarlett Peckham is book two of the Society of Sirens series. Cornelia is the niece of a duke, but has built her reputation as a scandalous painter. She and her friends are trying to raise money to build an institute for women, and she needs a place to exhibit her latest collection of paintings. One seemingly random day, her uncle's heir, Rafe, and now the Duke, comes to visit to inform her of her inheritance, which hinges on her being married. The surprise to the reader and all of her friends is that she is actually already married to Rafe himself, and he suggests they go public with the marriage so that she can claim her inheritance. What follows is a non chronological story of how these two ended up married 20 years ago and then estranged in all that time since then. I mostly kept reading because I wanted to find out what happened, but the story itself wasn't super interesting to me. Rafe is a smushy sort of fellow who falls in love too freely and scares off all his partners with his enthusiasm, and Cornelia is adamant about her independence and doesn't want the complication or obligation of love. He is an overzealous puppy for most of the book, and she's kind of the reluctant and selfish one, protecting her own independence and isolation. And then there's some political stuff happening in the background that wasn't super interesting to me. On the plus side, Rafe is unapologetically bisexual here, and one of his male lovers joins in for an encounter in the studio with Cornelia. So, if you like that stuff, here it is in a traditionally published historical romance. The Unclaimed Duchess by Jenna Peterson is book two of the Billingham Bastard series. Anne and Reese have been betrothed since childhood, and even though he is super serious and cold, she is totally in love with him and willing to be the perfect Duchess. After the events of book one of the series, Reese finds out a scandalous family secret that makes him question pretty much everything about himself and his family. And since he's being blackmailed with the information, he decides to keep his new wife at a distance. She is having none of it though and chases after him and tries to get him to stay with her. Lots of drama and scandal here and very fun to read. Duchess by Day, Mistress by Night by Stacey Reed is book one of the Rebellious Desire series. We have a widowed duchess asking questions about a missing maid from her household, and she is put in touch with a man who is known for solving these sorts of issues. Of course, they're also attracted to each other, though, so they start an affair while they're at it. It all needs to be kept pretty quiet because she needs to stay a respectable lady of society, and he has such a terrible reputation. The Courtesan Duchess by Joanna Shoup is book one of the Wicked Deception series. This one starts with an arranged marriage where the groom is drunk and has no idea who he has just married, and he leaves her pretty much immediately and resumes his debaucherous lifestyle. Several years later, the Duchess wants to solidify her claim to the money and the land of the estate and decides she needs to be pregnant with the Duke's heir to do so. She comes up with a plan to seduce her own husband to get herself pregnant without him even knowing who she is. Super interesting plot here with both people keeping secrets and basically being slightly shady. The Duchess Takes a Husband by Harper St. George is book four of the Gilded Age Heiresses series. We revisit the woman from our tragic prologue of book one, Camille, an American heiress who was married off to a much older duke. Throughout the first three books of the series, have seen bits of the cruel treatment she's endured from her husband, ultimately seeing his death in the bed of his mistress at a house party. Now that Camille has been a widow for the past 2 years, she is slowly trying to reclaim her identity and participating in causes that her husband would have disapproved of, like the Home for Young Women or the women's suffrage movement. She also seeks to determine if she can find sex pleasurable and propositions a man to assist her. Jacob is the illegitimate son of an earl and half brother to one of our guys from a previous book in the series. Now, Jacob refuses Camille's proposition at first, not wanting to make things awkward as their social circles overlap. But then he ends up needing a fake fiance to prove his stability for some business arrangement and asks Camille to play the part. Of course, she only agrees in exchange for those sex lessons that she wanted in the first place. We soon realize that Camille has underlying fears of the act due to the ill treatment from her husband, and Jacob needs to be gentle and patient, as well as allow Camille to be in control of their intimacies. We get to see our charming, rakish hero slowly fall in love with Camille and help in her journey towards empowerment. Overall, this was a great way to conclude the series and see our poor Camille finally get a happy ending. The Ice Duchess by Tracy Sumner is the prequel novella to the Duchess Society series. We have a childhood friends to lovers second chance romance with this book. Our very own Ice Countess Georgiana does not want to marry again after she was forced into a cruel and loveless marriage to save her father's finances. She meets her childhood crush Dex again while he is back from his geological expeditions. Now, he had left her many years before any romance could properly blossom. Now that Dax is back and he has promised his dying father that he would get married, he realizes that he's in love with Georgiana and must convince her of his suit. I really enjoyed this quick little novella, and it was a nice setup for future books in the series. Thank you so much for watching this video. Links to all of these books are in the description box. Like and subscribe so you don't miss future videos, and you can follow me on Instagram at randomolive.